If ever you're inclined to think that the gospel is irrelevant to your life because your life is messy and complicated, a really good gospel to reflect upon deeply is found in today's gospel. Gospel of Mark chapter 6, where Jesus basically goes home. So as you might recall, Jesus Christ is born in Bethlehem, but he grows up in Nazareth. And so this story is about Jesus Christ going home to his hometown of Nazareth. On the one hand, people are impressed. His fame has spread. They've heard about all these things that he's done, the things that he said. At the same time, though, they're kind of skeptical. And so what they say is, for example, isn't this the carpenter? Don't we know his parents? Isn't this the son of Mary and Joseph? Now, obviously, the key to unpacking the story is to figure out why are they scandalized, why are they skeptical. And just to be clear, it's not simply because Jesus Christ is human. Certainly a lot of people were thrown off by the fact that God could become man and take on human flesh, but that's not really what the story is all about. The reason why they're skeptical, the reason why they're scandalized is because Jesus comes from where they come from. That's the reason why they're thrown off. The thinking kind of goes like this. We know this guy. He grew up in our neighborhood. He played with our kids. Again, we know his parents, Mary and Joseph. And God is supposed to be holy. God is supposed to be transcendent. God is supposed to be wholly other. So how is it possible that God lives where we live? Especially because our lives are so messy and complicated. When you think about atheism, a lot of times we think about a classical atheism where I explicitly express a disbelief in the intellectual proposition that God exists. But oftentimes we're guilty of a more nuanced form of atheism, a more practical form of atheism where perhaps I recite the creed, perhaps I profess a certain belief in God, I say my prayers, and even go to Mass. But when it comes to my ordinary life, I live otherwise as if God doesn't really exist. Now, that can be symptomatic of a whole bunch of things, but a lot of times it gets to this thing we're talking about today. A lot of times the reason why that's the case is because deep down I don't really believe that God is present and active in my life because it is messy and complicated and ordinary. Implicitly, it's an invitation to look at the mystery of the Incarnation, right? So the prologue to the Gospel of John, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us in the messiness and the grime and the complication of life, right? And just to be clear, the point is not simply that God can be present here. In a certain sense, the point is God can only be found here, not because it's messy, but because it's real. God is the God of reality because he's the way and the truth and the life. Now, I'm going to spend the remainder of this homily using one example. So I'm going to focus on this movie, actually. It's been out for a month. It's made $1 billion, so I'm sure some of you have seen it. Inside Out 2. I'm going to go into it in some great detail. Hopefully it enhances your viewing experience of the movie if and when you actually do see it. But I also think it's really, really important for people to get the themes that are raised in this film, because that's really, really important. So it's an animated film. It's based on this little girl named Riley, who obviously is fictional. She has within her heart these different emotions, which are personified by different characters. So there's joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. And for the longest time, because she's young, she has a simple sense of self. Incidentally, that's what the sequel is about. So again, this is Inside Out 2 as opposed to Inside Out 1. Inside Out 1 is all about emotions in a certain sense, full stop, but Inside Out 2 is all about identity, one's sense of self. And more to the point, when it comes to Riley, her sense of self is really kind of simple and delicate and somewhat naive. Her sense of self is simply, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. And the core emotions, joy and whatnot, they're really intentional about trying to preserve this delicate sense of self. So much so that they have this catapult. Basically, anything which reeks of like painful memories, they put in this catapult and they launch it to the back of Riley's mind. Don't deal with that, right? So we keep the best and we toss out the rest. And this happens over and over again. Now, early on in the film, Riley becomes a teenager. And by getting older, by becoming a teenager, new complications, new complex emotions. So all these new emotions arrive on the scene, led by anxiety. And anxiety has this plan. Because Riley is older, because life is complicated, because the world is difficult and painful, we need to come up with a new identity, a new sense of self. So instead of, I'm a good person, how about this? I'm not good enough. Now the core emotions are like, that sounds kind of messed up. And so they object, but then they're put in the catapult and they're launched to the back of Riley's mind. So they become repressed emotions. In the meantime, you see the fruits of this new anxious personality based on this statement again, I'm not good enough. The thing about anxiety is that it's meant to keep you safe, and it kind of works. So it reinforces the behavior, right? So you see in Riley's life, okay, I'm anxious, but in a certain sense, I'm strong. I'm productive, I'm efficient. I produce that which the world finds to be important and valuable. And the world will always encourage you in that particular direction. And Joy and all the rest, they see this and they're like, gosh, like, what does that mean? And so there's this crisis of faith in a certain sense. And so Joy in particular, she has this moment where she reflects on it. And she's like, gosh, is that just what happens when people get older? They just become more anxious. And there's no room for joy. Now, fortunately, they snap out of it and they come up with this plan to go back to headquarters. So what they do is that they release this stockpile of painful memories and they ride the wave all the way back to headquarters. And they realize that Riley is suffering from this massive panic attack. And initially, Joy thinks, well, the solution is to simply replace the anxious sense of self with the childhood sense of self. So instead of I'm not good enough, to replace it with I'm a good person. And she does that, but it doesn't work. She's still anxious. She's still in the throes of this massive panic attack. And then Joy realizes what I need to do is discard the old and to allow this new thing to emerge. This new identity, this new sense of self, based on the compilation of her painful memories and her pleasant memories. And so she uproots this childhood sense of self based on, I'm a good person. And everyone's kind of worried. What's going to happen? What's going to emerge in its place? And this new identity emerges. Instead of saying one simple thing like, I'm a good person or I'm not good enough, there's a whole compilation of statements. So what you hear is, I'm selfish. I'm kind. I'm not good enough. I'm a good person. I want to fit in, but I want to be myself. But I'm scared. I make mistakes. I'm nice. I'm mean. I'm a good friend. I'm a terrible friend. I'm strong, but sometimes I need help. With that last statement, Joy leans in and just gives her a big hug. All the emotions, they join in, and pretty soon all the emotions are hugging Riley in that new sense of self. So embracing her and loving her in her messiness, in her complication, and in her vulnerability. And that's the thing which makes her strong. So what you see in terms of real life, she is talking with her friends, and her friends are like, are you okay? And initially she lies. Initially she's like, yeah, I'm okay. And then she's like, no, I'm not. So she admits her struggle, she admits her weakness, she admits her messiness and vulnerability. And she acknowledges that by acting out of this sense of vulnerability and anxiety, she's hurt them. And so now she asks them for their forgiveness, and she's forgiven and reconciled. The relationship becomes stronger because of this newfound spiritual maturity. When you build your sense of identity on the sense of self based on anxiety, obviously that's not good. Symptomatically, it's painful, but existentially, it's not good as well. It flies in the face of the reality of your dignity as a beloved child of God. God who is both Father, but also powerful. So there's that. But at the same time, to simply say that I'm a good person, full stop, is also not good. And why? Because it feeds to this notion that I don't need help. I don't need anything. I don't need people because I'm a good person. The sweet spot is to adopt the language of Pope Francis. So once Pope Francis was asked in an interview, who are you? And he paused and he thought about it and he said, well, who am I? I'm a sinner who has been looked upon by the Lord. I am a sinner who has been looked upon by the Lord. So I am good. I'm a child of God. I'm capable of amazing things by the grace of God. But at the same time, I'm weak. Sometimes I get scared. Sometimes I make mistakes. Sometimes I do selfish and hurtful things. I hurt people. I hurt myself. And so I need help. I need grace. I need patience. I need forgiveness. I need reconciliation. I need love. And I need God. You always have to go back to this thing that the very name of Jesus means God saves. There will never be a moment in your life when you don't need to be saved, when you don't need help, when you don't need love, because you will always need Jesus. But that's okay, because Jesus is real, and his love is true, and he's fully present to you in the messiness and complication of your actual life.